Thank you for such a lovely, warm, welcoming introduction, and thank you so much for having me. So this is very biblical this evening. So in keeping with the biblical theme, this book is When This World Comes to an End, which is from an Appalachian folk song. There'll be signs and wonders when this world comes to an end. And the first section is people in history or moments in history. The second is the unidentified faces in photographs. And the third section are riffs on fairy tales. So I'm going to read a little bit from each. And I have a bad sense of time. If I go on for too long, just wave at me. And I think that's all I really need to say, except that the I in the poem is never I. The I in the poem is always a character voice. So. Zola, bravest of Leonardo's apprentices, leaps from the tower of San Francisco wearing his master's wings. At night, my master dreams time and heaven. I, his apprentice, dream nothing. I am the mirror that gives him back, the sigh breathed into his mouth at night, youth that saves him from his age. I am salvation, the angel beating copper wings. My body strong as woven reeds built to remember his body when it is dust. A splinter of memory lodged under my heart, my shoulder blades where now the wings sprout madly tied with silk, the harness casing my skin woven chrysalis. I leaped, I flew. There was a moment of lift. I thought I could veer left or right, soar between spires, past the reds and blues of cathedral windows, leave the cracked ground. Leave him, an old glitter-eyed man who imagines luridly, carnally, all he cannot do himself. Then I fell. Clutching at time, I went down. A crunch of bones, stone. Earth had the last word. I did not die. He held my head. He prayed for me. I sucked my life back through his mouth. His sigh saved me for my age. Now we are even. The later autumn, which is about W.H. Auden at the very end of his life when he was living in Germany. In the evening, wine, then vodka. Auden, grievously mathematical, lays his head down at the end of each portioned day. The guests must be gone by 9:30. Timetabled, ticking off the fly-blown minutes, he gets hungry only when the clock strikes the appropriate hour, lonely only between nightfall and morning. Wrist shaking, fingers yellow-stained, he sucks his cuffs, murmurs madly that all things are roads, that God is a comfort, that he should have been a desiccated bishop, eyeing the choir. His voice dies out in the muffled cloth. Reed bent but hopeful, he encounters each day's white wasteland. The pen strikes through, mapping the way to an enduring solitude, age-dimmed. Wine for speech, vodka for oblivion. He rifles through the spattered sheets, reflecting that language still fails when faced with such an ending. Putting this down to faults of construction, he prepares for bed, lies in the dark, his hair thatching for an unsheltered head, muttering, suspicious, watchful of all human love. William Kemmler remembering his wife, and William Kemmler was the first man to die in the electric chair after he murdered his wife Tilly with a hatchet in 1889. I was not a good husband. Whiskey lay like piss in dozens of glasses. I pissed holes in the floor, drowned the mice. I tore through our small life, streaked like lightning, my blood oiled down thick, my eyelids permanently swollen. She sidestepped me whenever she could. I studied her hair, coiled and frowsy with light, the sweat beading on her upper lip. The first blow I thought she'd fall apart easily as a jug breaking, streaming water. 17 cuts. Her skull sharded, a map of red drops on the wall. Some country I had never been. Do you understand me? I stood back, the continent shifted, the new country raised up on the kitchen wall. I saw it. I do not avoid death. not since. We have passed each other nodding. He knows I am his twin, his face in the mirror. I straighten my cuffs. Everything there is to fear, I have already seen. And this is the later life of Judas Iscariot. It's a really biblical evening. Okay, the later life of Judas Iscariot. Traditionally red-haired, he stands out in a crowd. Orange ginger grizzle going gray, freckles on fish-white puckered skin, a sleepless, constipated look. I wonder though if this is anything but the theatrics of wives' tales, the birthmark, the portent, and for ease of identification, a villain's swollen eye. In fact, he is unremarkable, pleasant, good at parties, capable with money, knows a thing or two about wine, well-read without embarrassing learnedness, well invested, a patron of various charities, kindly in that purely personal way. Retired, he bought a small house to the Japanese rock garden and collected pictures and was happy. It was only the other apostles who wished he'd hanged himself in that ravening field planted with silver pieces, the rope pulling his face purple, his eyes staring at the sun. Dante saw him in the mouth of the beast, but who can say? He saw him on the backside. It could have been anyone. And Dante was a confused and trembling witness. These days he sits in a deck chair, watching the water, his face lined and friendly. No complaints, no mark on the neck. And the last poem of this section is Nick Drake and Emily Dickinson meet in the afterlife, which is self-explanatory. They are cautious virgins and unfriendly as they've always been. These two never loved the flesh, so death is already peculiarly their own. Breathless, they look each other up and down, her eyes that famous residual sherry, his blank as stones on the riverbed. They both wear white now, though she always has. They feel awkward in their wings, find the light brighter than they wished, unfettered consciousness a terror for those whose heart was limit. This is to say they recognize each other. Neither expected this. The end, they thought, would mean a sealed box, a final solitude, the heart intact as an egg forever. He tells her about the thin gray light when the songs came halting in pieces, and she tells him about her furtive sleep and 1,000 poems hidden in a drawer. And the second section, which is almost all of the poems in the second section are based on the William James collection in the City of Toronto Archives. And he was one of the first commercial photographers in Canada, and he took thousands and thousands of pictures of the city. And because he was selling to everybody, there are pictures of crowds and fairgrounds and politicians and riots and fires, and if it was there, he photographed it. So, and not very much is known about his life. There's a novel in there if anyone wants to write it. But this poem is the cover image of the book, which is a fairground horse that would dive twice a day, or there were two horses that would dive twice a day into Lake Ontario for a crowd. So, the White Horse Divers, Lake Ontario, 1908. If you check out the book, you can see the picture. It's quite something. Twice a day, two white horses climb a scaffold, pause, and dive down a long way, then clamber out again, dripping. Was he aware of the crowd's long gasp? Did she, feeling the stream of air, the startle of water, have a complacent moment, knowing herself Pegasus, though without wings? Or was the plunge each afternoon and evening mirrored by a lurch in the curve of the belly, no matter how many times they climbed that scaffold for the great fall of the sun, the reverse birth as the lake closed over them? Then the panic and struggle toward shore, applause, blankets, and a brief respite, just long enough to forget the seething people, the rickety planks, the sleek tumble down. J.W. Gorman's diving horses, the white beauties, king and queen, dive here every afternoon and evening. The slender scaffold bridges out over the lake, the horse halfway through a tense and sunlit dive, its freakish grace transfiguring the crowd, a trickle of the mildly curious. Close your eyes. There you are, flattened to that breath-stealing photograph. You are absorbed by presence in white. But are you the horse, or a woman in the crowd below, white dress streaked with gray, suddenly, painfully weeping for the flight before you? Or perhaps you are the more dangerous, more beautiful tragedy, the circular motion of afternoon and evening, the king and queen trembling before each execution, then delivered from the water, given food, love, from a silent man who brushes their coats. Be the horse, be patient and simple, blind to anything beyond this moment. Step out on trembling legs toward the lake, knowing that there is something behind this, something that sustains, propels, repeats. Blind twins facing away from each other, photograph 1850. When we were children, our father gave me a chestnut and her lace. This was to make us know the differences in the world. What is made yields. What is grown stands. It endures, it refuses. We stand together. Blindness, our single property. I honor the differences between us. Many lace makers are blind, he said, a simple, avaricious man, and their fingers know the knots, the thread, better than eyes do. He touched my eyelids, blessed me, then hers, though that I only guess. Her hands wither, her hair falling athwart my face at night, the only touch I know, bound together in permanent twilight, fingers laced. And the last section, which is called Signs and Wonders, is mostly prose poems that are not fairy tales, but they are meant to be in the style of fairy tales. 3 Cautions for Water. This is a series of 3 prose poems. 1. Homeward. On Tuesday it rained so much that when the girl came home, her mother had been eaten by a school of fish. The girl knew this because her mother always wore a pink armband on her left arm. When the girl paddled into her front yard, she saw it caught in the lowest tree branch. It was savaged by the very small teeth of very small fish. The girl identified these marks correctly because she was a resourceful child who carried a jeweler's eyeglass in her pocket. She had paddled home in the janitor's slop pail. She paddled with a shovel and used the janitor's jacket as a sail. She had managed all this without sullying her white shoes. When she saw the armband, she exclaimed, "Oh, dolorous day, oh, woeful chance," and clamored and yammered, shamefully spinning round and round in the weeds. Her hair flew up in lightning streaks, her teeth ground black pepper, her tears were pearl white with lamentation. She smashed her face down into the water. Then she wiped her eyes and made herself a stiff one, going round and round in the tepid water. It's not so bad, it could be worse. She had another. She began to feel festive. She roosted on the chimney. In the morning it was sunny. A pigeon had died in the chimney. She had breakfast. She turned round 3 times and tore the shingles with her scrabbled red hands. In time she made a hole and crawled into the house. The water had receded from the upper floor. She danced a jig, her feet tapping and squelching on the rotting boards. She danced so fast she gave off sparks and black smoke. The heat dried up all the water from her house. The girl caroused and reveled all by herself. The neighbors barely noticed her. Years passed. When the time came, she divided herself into 2 pieces so she would have somebody to marry. They lived a long time in that house. They prospered. The girl fed the fish morning and evening. One day she gave them a finger to eat, the next day a long shin bone, and the next an elbow. Little by little, the little fish swam through her until there was nothing left but a pair of soft white shoes. And then it rained again. 2. The physician's wife. Once there was a physician. He was attentive, his eyes were bright. He wore a white wig, a periwinkle coat, his cheeks were sunken with thought, his forehead folded in wisdom. On his fingers he wore 5 fine rings. He had a wife of whom he was fond. She also wore a white wig. They lived by a slow river full of dark weeds and leeches. His wife collected the leeches for him in an elegant glass jar to give to his patients. She was very fond of him. All day he would see his patients. He listened as they ran through the wheezings, sneezings, blowings, whistlings, and snortings, each frail complainant. He had great faith in the powers of speech. He found that as they itemized the peculiarities of their pain, the pain itself seemed to lessen. The physician was fascinated, because you see, he had himself never felt pain. He did not know what it was. He would sit in his study surrounded by white candles that singed the edges of his white curling wig and write down everything that his patients had told him. He even added embellishments. When this was done, he would place the accounts carefully in a drawer in his desk marked Confessions. His wife never looked in there. She had great respect for the sanctity of the confessional. One day it began to rain. The river swelled. The physician woke up with a twinge in his throat as though there was a little tear there. The rain went on falling. He was in pain at last. In great excitement, he gestured to his wife. He found he could not speak. She shook her head, perplexed. He jumped from foot to foot. He danced her around the room. He spun her down the stairs. She smiled fondly, shook her head, went off to make tea. The rain fell, danced before his eyes. Nothing had ever been so beautiful. He went into his study and began to write. As he wrote, he felt his body begin to curl, shriveling like a salted leech. He wrote faster and faster until his pen sliced and tore at the paper. The wind howled in his throat. It became so small that he could not see over the edge of his desk. So, with his remaining strength, he signed the paper with trembling hands, folded it, and dropped it in the drawer. Shrinking rapidly, he tottered and clambered into the drawer himself. He folded himself up and turned into a seed, small and black, on top of a pile of papers. When his wife came in, wet from the rain and tired from collecting leeches in the river, she wiped her shoes carefully and knocked on the study door. When no answer came, she knocked again, and when there was still no answer, she went into the drawing room and espoused the single life from that day forward. Her husband lay pea-sized on the papers of his confession and fretted. She never looked in the desk drawer. She had great respect for the sanctity of the confessional. 3. Old Ophelia. Before she was entirely carried away by the flood, she called out the litany of her long life, clutching a red handkerchief and a few flowers. I have seen it, she cried over the crashing waves of the green swell, the fish tin cans, toxic waste of infinite orange objects, all the netted, cast-out final communications of water. I have seen the rushed burials, the deserted suburbs and cracked streets, the old who remember the uses of words that lie about it, the crazed ownerless house pets running down alleyways, all those terrible small dogs. I've seen my husband ride by on the back of my neighbor, and both of them wore dark suits and silver crowns. My husband lost his front teeth and combed the whole city looking for them, and found them clasped in the fat fist of a small boy. How beautiful I was then, between the wars with my slip showing. How beautiful I was, she shrieked. I was the voice calling in the wilderness. I was the beginning of the day, the seasonal sale, the lunch special before 3 p.m. I have seen great rifts open in the ground. I have seen the end of writing and the poets burned and the miracles of modern architecture. I have seen the sun go down for the last time and rise again from force of habit. I have seen generations abolish themselves and men made unnecessary by obeying orders. I have churned up a dozen children and done without them in the end, and I am resigned to the new nightfall. Oh, the days that I have seen. And she threw the flowers and the handkerchief to a group of children standing on the bank and was carried away. The children pocketed these treasures and wondered what the old woman had meant. Except for the rising water, everything was fine. How am I doing for time? I have 2 more. Yep. Good, please. The Witch and the Birds. She keeps them in wicker cages, pretty maidens, pretty girls, throats necklaced with feathers. They would be lost without her, she reminds them. The wood is very deep, very dark. She lives in the middle of the wood, and her house is not gingerbread, but terrible stone. Lost in the wood as they were, ringed round with branches, all that fine flesh torn, the moon watching them through the trees all night. The witch now keeps them shuttered, but her halls are bright. The sun shines in, even in deep winter, when their poor transformed claws freeze to the perch. Those claws that once were hands, those throats that once chafed against high collars. The witch is white as milk, red as blood, dark as ebony. She sits eating seeds, and the youngest ones fly to her and shit on her shoulders, and she feeds them seeds from her own wet, small mouth. Birdsong shrieks and beats around her happy solitude and means nothing to her, because for all her cleverness she cannot understand one single trill. But the birds all sing together, all sweetly together they sing, Mother, Mother, who shall bury me? And the last poem of the collection is called Learning to Read, and it's for David White, who was once a small boy who I used to tutor a long time ago, and he's 17 now and doing well, but this is for him. Learning to read. See this. This is the first letter of your first word. To me it means running. To you something else. This letter means flight. A bird, a machine, the timed exit in the middle of the night, the knock on the wall, the broken walk. This one is a scar. This one a fresh cut. This one a fall into the fire, accidental, and you screamed for hours, but really you're still a small boy. This one at the bottom of the page is sweetness. In the corner, rescue, and below it, history. The last one is a door, only for you, and behind it one more so small you can't read it, meaning not yet. So you take it and pass it on. Thank you very much.